Just wanted to say before we get started that both Amy and Bonnie have books available up here, and they're going to stick around afterwards and sign them. So if you'd like that, please come up and get one, and they'll be happy to do that for you. And now, without further ado, the founder and CEO of Heleo, Rufus Griscom.
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is, I think it's like the 7th or 8th Cocktails and Conversations that we've done. And when I first came and sort of pitched this whole idea to Stephanie at Soho House to do this with Soho House, I brought the stack of books, and it was like, you know, Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit and Susan Cain's, Quiet, and I think I had this book by Angela Duckworth. It wasn't out yet. Yet another Richard Pine book called Grit. And I was like, we really think this is going to be a big book. You know, that's what the agent tells us. And then and she was like, yeah, okay. Then we had Amy Cuddy's presence, and she said, oh my gosh, Amy Cuddy, can we get her to come today? So here we are on our 8th Cocktails and Conversations, delivering on the dream of Soho House to have Amy. And had they known about Bonnie St. John, they would have been even more excited. We've got such a great lineup tonight. I think that I was talking earlier with Amy about how one of the privileges we've had at Heleo, working with a lot of the top nonfiction writers in the world, is to spend a lot of time looking at all the different ways, all the different life stories and journeys people take to ending up writing these books that change people's lives and have this massive, massive impact. And there are a lot of different kind of varieties, of course, but one commonality or one very powerful combination is when you have, we found that powerful ideas combined with really engaging storytelling is sort of the magic combination. You can almost think of the story as like the lozenge, like the sugar-coated exterior, inside of which are these, the power of, life-changing scientific ideas. And when that happens, when those two things connect, it's incredibly powerful. And I think it's particularly powerful when part of the story is one's own personal narrative. And I think something that's really interesting about both Amy and Bonnie is that they both have extraordinary life stories that have also impacted their work in different ways. So diving right in, Amy Cuddy, many of you know, she is, looking it up online, a psychologist known for research on stereotyping, discrimination, emotions, power, nonverbal behavior, and the effect of social stimulus on hormone levels. But most everybody knows her as as having delivered the second most watched TED Talk ever, watched 35 million times, and then I think that gave birth to, or was part of what caused her extraordinary book Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges, to come out in a little over a year ago. If you haven't bought Presence, if you haven't bought it yet today, we have copies right here. You should absolutely buy it, preferably tonight, if not tomorrow. Here's what the New York Times Book Review has to say. Cuddy brings an abundance of humility and charm to the page. Her presence itself, her open-hearted desire to help the insecure and the uneasy in this age of anxiety, shines through. Presence feels at once concrete and inspiring, simple but ambitious, above all, truly powerful. So please go out and buy Presence. Then Bonnie St. John is equally extraordinary. I'm actually very interested to know this. Maybe this will come up. I don't know if it will. The sequencing of her extraordinary life story, because she graduated magna cum laude from Harvard, where Amy is a professor. She was a Rhodes Scholar. She also happened to, somewhere along the way, win the silver and 2 bronze medals in the 1984 Paralympics in Austria. So maybe you can help us with the sequencing of that, but that's pretty extraordinary. She's the author of 7 books, and Micro-Resilience, Minor Shifts for Major Boosts in Focus, Drive, and Energy is I guess the 7th, right? And not surprisingly, Bonnie cites Amy's work and her research in her book. So thank you all both for being here tonight, and with no further ado, Bonnie and Amy.
I'm really excited, Bonnie, if her book, if this book had come out before mine, so it's a better version of my book.
Thank you.
We'll get to that. Shall I start?
You can
Start
start.
the conversation? We've talked a lot about what we want to talk about, but then we get talking and think, no, we have to save it.
Yeah, we have to save the
We can't
conversation
have
for
the
here.
conversation on the
So
phone.
we did. We saved it for June.
All right. So one of the themes that is consistent across our work, and we won't only talk about consistent themes, but also places where we diverge and how we think about things, but is that I think both of us have overcome life-altering, body-altering, mind-altering challenges. So major injuries, illnesses, losses.
I had my leg cut off. She had a major brain injury, just to be clear.
There you go. And you know, to some extent, I think people think that's the thing we will be talking about when we first go in and talk to an audience. But what's interesting is both of us have come to be very interested in not the big challenges, the life-altering single-shot challenges, but the small challenges that people face, you know, on a, what we say, week-to-week basis. So the challenges, and they're idiosyncratic, they vary from person to person, but they're the challenges that we find really interesting.
Yeah, so I'm talking about micro changes, and you're talking about self-nudging, and we're both focused on getting the little things, fighting the little battles.
Right, so what kinds of challenges are you interested in? What, you know, and how did you get from major life challenge to actually what's interesting are these little challenges?
With micro-resilience, we got really interested in it because we were looking at research about why certain tennis players always win. And they were videoing them and looking at, you know, why you're only looking at a handful of names, they're always winning, and there wasn't one consistent skill that all those people have, but what it was is what they do between the points. And so it's those little recoveries that give you the edge. So I guess the answer to your question is, it's that competitive edge. And it's so funny, if you hang around Olympians, which I have done many times, hang around with a group of Olympians, it's so funny because they're always looking for that little extra thing. You know, you're going to dinner and they're like, oh, I know a better place to park. You know, oh yeah, oh, I can get seats a little closer. You know, and I swear to you, it is the funniest thing. If you hang around lawyers, they argue. If you hang around investment bankers, we probably have some here tonight, they're all like looking for the typo because they want to, you know, not lose $1 million. But Olympians, it's always, what is that little thing that's going to give me an edge? It's going to make me a little better. And so I think that's what we were focused on, because that's how you make the big change, is by a series of little changes. How about you? So why do you end up focusing on the little things?
Because the big changes, as you're experiencing them, you don't necessarily recognize them as, you know, one singular big change. I think you notice how they affect these sort of more mundane things. So you notice that actually the big change is really about a lot of tiny challenges.
When you get there.
Exactly. So you become more aware of the challenges that were there already that now have gotten to be a bit bigger. So I think that's part of it. But it's also that you know, it's hard to give people, something that happens to me quite often, I'm sure that you have had this happen as well. People who've had traumatic brain injuries write to me, or parents of people who've had traumatic brain injuries, and they ask me, and it's honestly, it's the most heartbreaking kind of email that I get. How did you do it? What's the formula? I don't know what to do. I can't get there. And you know,
everyone wants their kid to end up being a Harvard professor, and
going
from brain injury to Harvard professor, and there's no silver bullet to make a shot.
And I realized that I don't exactly know, but I can put together the little pieces. I can put together the steps, and that's where I feel like I can help people. I can help people with each little challenge and thinking back over how I got through each little challenge.
And similarly, everyone always wants to know is, you know, you're so resilient, you overcame not only having your leg amputated, abuse in my childhood, you know, so many different things, and they're like, how can I be more resilient too? And so you're right. I mean, I wanted to give people practical things, and it's all the little things you can do every day that make the powerful changes. So, and it's more motivating. And you talk about that in your book too, is it's more motivating to do the little things. Most people define resilience as, you know, like recovering from a hurricane or a divorce. It's the big thing. And so people say it's hard to be resilient. But if you define it as small, you can improve. You can win. You can win that.
That's right. And I think about, I often talk about New Year's resolutions. You talk about macro resilience or macro challenges. And I think of those as New Year's resolutions. So where people decide, I'm going to make this enormous change. I decided, 11:50 p.m. on January 31st, or December 31st, that I'm going to make this big change. And, then guess what? By the end of January, every media outlet has some clickbait headline about why New Year's resolutions fail. Right? But we go through this again and again. And, I think it's the same kind of thing. If you fail because they loom too large, and there are a million steps between you now and that New Year's resolution version of you. And every time you fail, and you will, just like any game, any tennis match is a series of tiny, tiny wins and losses. That's what it's going to be getting to a New Year's resolution, but we somehow think of it as a singular thing. And so we fail, and we quit, and we decide we're not going to do that. So why not instead think of it as process and break it up into these tiny little, how about if you just try to get through tomorrow?
So I have a question for you. Are you good at it? Are you good at presence and are you good at dealing with these anxious, you're helping everybody to deal with these anxious situations.
I don't think I don't think calm people write books about anxiety. So I mean, if they do, probably not many people will relate to it. No, I mean, I'm getting better, but it's really hard, it's getting much easier. I have to say, in some ways, I feel like I've totally conquered it. So I love public speaking more than anything, and I used to hate it more than anything. I now feel, and I'm really, if I had heard somebody say this 10 years ago, I would have thought they were full of shit. But I honestly feel more relaxed speaking to audiences than I do in any other context, and that includes, being at home cooking dinner. And it's not that I don't love that, but that feels in some ways more challenging. I really feel at home now talking to big audiences. Where I find things stressful is small interactions, like small groups, 2, 3 people, 4 people. And so I was telling Bonnie about this. So I've decided to make this kind of midlife transition where I don't really want to be on the traditional academic track. I want to be in academia, but I don't want to be married to academia. I want to
have more flexibility.
I was going to say I want an open relationship with academia. And I want to be able to talk to broader audiences and have the time to do that and write books. And so I'm trying to kind of create a position for myself that works, that allows me to do that. And that would be another school in Cambridge that's not Harvard. We'll see.
Which was.
And so recently I've had a series of conversations with people at that place. And because this place is a little bit more flexible, a little bit less conventional, it's never been clear to me for any of these conversations if they're conversations or interviews. And the funny thing is that it doesn't really matter. The topic and content will be the same. It should be.
But you get all stressed out about it.
Well, when I get there and I start thinking, wait, maybe this is an interview, suddenly I start to feel myself shrink. And I start to go over what I want to make sure I say. I start to rehearse things. Instead of being really excited about this thing that I want to talk about, this idea that I want to bring to them.
Wait, suddenly I realized I'm not taking up very much space.
I know, that's an unfortunate effect. Because then you do get people sprawling, especially in airplanes.
I'm going smaller.
I have had people recognizing me on airplanes, the person sitting next to me, and if they realize that I'm the power posing lady, which is what people sometimes say, some people, usually men, tend to sprawl a little bit more than
you need to show me
like this. Okay, I got it. Gotcha.
But it's funny what you said about speaking. I can so relate to, and some of my team is here too, and they'll laugh because at the book launch party that we did a few weeks ago for the micro resilience book, I was saying to them at the beginning, I'm so nervous because I don't know what to do. You know, it's not, if it was just give a speech, I know how to do that, and I do that all the time, but it's a party, and I just greet people, and you know, I don't know what it is, but it was fun, but it's I know what you mean, we've done so much speaking.
Yes.
So, but how does that relate to getting good at what you teach? What's your favorite thing out of your arsenal that you teach other people to do? What is the one thing you've taught yourself?
So the idea of, so back to this sort of interview versus conversation. First, I decide that it is a conversation. It doesn't really matter if it's an interview, because I want to walk away feeling that I've best represented myself, that I really got to engage, that I got to learn from this person I'm talking to, that I really got to share my enthusiasm, my conviction about whatever it is I'm talking about, so I can walk away with a sense of satisfaction and not regret, right? And that will ultimately serve me, whether it gets me the job or not. I will feel much better, and I will grow much more and be less afraid the next time I go into that situation if I do it that way. So that's you know, approaching it as approaching it with a sense of trust and openness. So I trust this person that I'm interacting with. I trust these students I'm teaching. They want to get the most out of this too. That serves everyone. It creates value for everyone.
So what you've learned or changed most for yourself is to shift from being in that threat mode, defensive mode, to being in that trust mode. And if it's the way you talk or the way you sit or, you know, the self-talk as much as the,
I would say so. And I, you know, for me, getting there really is very visceral. I mean, my anxiety has always been very visceral. And I remember waking up from the head injury, I felt like my body was buzzing. That there was like, you know, currents of electricity going through me, and everything felt super overstimulating, and you know, it was very visceral, and I carried it that way. So being aware of the anxiety in my body and imagining that expanding allows me to release it. That's sort of the image that I have. I hear from clinical psychologists who use, you know, expansive posture to decrease negative mood and increase, you know, memory for positive events, because they say even their clients who resist it say that when they expand, they can't hold on to the negative thoughts. Oh, they almost don't want to let go of them, because when you're depressed, you sort of want to hold on to that. It feels like your only truth or something.
Yeah,
right?
they talk about crowding out, like the positive crowds out the negative.
A
So
little
if you
bit,
get, if you get enough positive, it can crowd it out.
But the idea, you know, from the 2012 talk, I think, to me, is much bigger than that. It's not about just standing like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes in a bathroom. It is about carrying yourself in a way that is expansive, with a sense of power and pride and poise, doing that unapologetically, especially, and I have one child, and it's a son, and I don't want him to in any way collapse or contract, but I'm honestly more worried about our daughters, and because I watch what happens when they hit middle school and they start to collapse. They start to wrap these little girls who were doing cartwheels and throwing their arms in the air and not worried about sort of keeping their knees together when they sat down, suddenly hit 6th grade and they become wallflowers. And you know, our research is showing that kids learn that around the age of 4. By 6, they really know it. By the time they're 10, they're expressing those things. So expansion is not just about standing like Wonder Woman. It's about sharing your ideas. It's about slowing down, taking your time, speaking slowly, taking longer strides. You know, when you move.
For me, when you talk about that, I have a really visceral memory too of coming home from the hospital the first time that my leg was amputated. And I spent most of 1st grade in the hospital and then came back. So I had the kids I started 1st grade with, went away for 6 months and then came back and went to my school to see my friends. And I was walking, I had one crutch and my new artificial leg, and I was walking on the playground with Carol Lacrosse, my best friend. And a lot of people were staring. I know all the other kids are staring, and some are following us around. And I remember the feeling of that, of everybody staring at me, and you're the crippled kid, you're weird, you know, and it's very visceral. And I looked around and I thought, well, if everyone's following me and staring at me, I'm gonna wave like Miss America. And it was, and we can talk about a number of moments like that.
I'd like to ask you about another moment, because that we've talked about when you were an adult that was similar, and I think it gets into some really important and interesting issues. So can you tell me the story?
Well, what I was sharing with you earlier is, so my daughter was about 3 or 4 years old, and I had promised I would take her to the aquarium, and I was living in San Diego, so anybody who knows, the aquarium's in La Jolla, which is a really posh part of San Diego, and everybody's wearing Chanel. And anyway, so I had my daughter, I had promised her I would go, and long story that I won't explain to you, but I ended up being in curlers. So I had curlers in my hair, which we will not explain why, and I'm taking her to the aquarium, and I was wearing a leg that was like blue titanium. And I'm interracial, and my daughter is like blonde with blue eyes, and so everybody always asks me, are you the nanny, And so anyway, so at this moment, I'm going into La Jolla looking like Robo-Nanny. And we walk in the aquarium, and you get faced with this wave of emotion, and it's not warm and friendly, right? People are looking at you like, what are you doing here? And it's disdain, it's disgust, it's disapproval, lots of disses. And you walk into the first room and there's this wave that hits you. And then you go around the corner to the sea anemone room and it's a new wave that hits you. And my daughter's oblivious, she's like, sea anemones, yeah. But it would have been really easy to say, this is really hard, I'm not doing this, I'm going home. But there was something very familiar, it's that same feeling of when I was a little kid and walked onto that playground, and it's this. And for me, when I talk about confidence, so there's a whole chapter in my Live Your Joy book about confidence, it's a very visceral feeling. And it's I'm going to keep my posture straight, I'm going to look you in the eye, I'm going to smile, and I don't care if you have to sting, because I gotcha, And there is something very visceral about finding that confidence. And I talk a lot to minority women about that, too, because we show up differently. People don't just seed us confidence. In fact, when I was working on the confidence chapter with my husband, who's a white male, he didn't understand what I was talking about because he doesn't have to face that feeling of people looking at you like you're not worthy, and how you have to stand up into that, and it's how you carry yourself matters. So yeah, so I have a very visceral understanding as a person with a disability and as a minority woman that we have to carry ourselves like we matter, and that it's not easy to do that when the people around you aren't giving it to you.
I want to pause and just allow us to reflect on that because you said stand up into it. I started so my main training is in studying stereotyping and prejudice and discrimination. So I study racism and sexism and intersectionality and isms. And part of what got me to where I am, studying what I am, was talking to groups of people who are in either underserved populations, marginalized, stigmatized populations, powerless populations, and telling them about the research. And you know what social psychologists have found? There's a lot of prejudice.
What a shocker!
I know.
Who knew?
That's what we've found. You know what we have not found? Good ways to reduce it. So I would say for every good paper on interventions that reduce prejudice, I bet there are 500 documenting the existence of it and the mechanisms underlying it, the prejudice itself. So to the extent that I can, I feel like I know this story, and it's so deeply moving to me to meet you. You're a hero to me, also because I love skiing so much. I want to learn on skiing from you. But you've overcome enormous challenges, and you're this incredible role model to so many different groups of people as someone who unapologetically carries herself with power and pride and poise and also generosity.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want more of you.
Likewise. We're like, this is like a touch of love fest. And with resilience too, so we're talking about like what have you had to learn? What I've had to learn from my own work too is not to be such a type A person. That I think maybe because I had so many things I had to overcome, I'm like a sledgehammer, it's like boom, and drive it till you drop and push myself till I fall over, because I didn't have the option of just being normal. You know, I never had. A friend of mine once said, wow, you really never back down from fear. We were in my kitchen. I was 37 years old, and I remember she said this. She said, you really never back down from fear. And honest to God, I looked at her in that moment, and I said, there was an option? And I had never thought about that until that moment, that you could back down from fear.
Wow.
And so, but I lived so much with fear as my friend. And
what do you mean by that?
You just do it anyway. I stand at the top of a ski hill and go 75 miles an hour on one leg. You don't
it's not that you're
It's not that you're not afraid. You just do it anyway.
But you say fear as your friend. Do you mean as your sort of the person in your class who you didn't really like, but they're there anyway, or someone who actually was an ally who in some way served you?
Maybe a bit of both. But what I started to learn in the kitchen at age 37 is that I didn't always have to be that way. And that's part of what's in your work too, is how to let go of fear and operate from some other place. And that's very much what's in the Micro-Resilience book, is a whole series of tools of how to be less fear-based, because we're a better person. What we've heard from the people who've done the Micro-Resilience work with us is, oh my gosh, it doesn't change me, it just lets me be the me I want to be.
That's right.
And so I think that's what's in common in our work too.
That's huge commonality.
Yeah.
It's when I first started doing this work, I really actually thought, here's what would happen. I'm at Harvard Business School, and I've been there 9 years. My first year, immediately, I always attract the students who are not the mainstream students. They're the ones who feel like they're outsiders. And it's funny, I grew up in Amish country. Your husband did as well. We just learned that. We're both Pennsylvania Dutch. I did not go to I went to a school where only a third of my class went to college. I paid for school at a state school. I was a roller skating waitress. I was not
a great image, isn't it?
So I never felt like an insider really at any of these places, like Princeton or Harvard. And so I feel like I sort of attracted those students. What I thought when I first started talking to them was, I just got to get them through this weird place that is Harvard Business School, where half of your grade is participation. It's weird. There's nothing else in the world that's quite like this. So they don't have to internalize it. They just have to get through it. And that was where the fake it till you make it thing came from. It was the first student, the one that I talked about in the TED Talk, who said to me, I can't participate. And I got her to talk, and on the last day she spoke, and it was amazing. And I keep in touch with her, and she's amazing. And she's doing what she wants, which is actually education, not business. And she said, I have become the best version of myself. She said, what happened was I slowly felt myself dropping the shield that was preventing me from being who I am. So she wasn't faking it. She was only faking it to herself to kind of get through to becoming herself. And there's my favorite quote about power is from Robert Caro, who was Lyndon Johnson's biographer and historian, great writer. Someone once asked him, does power corrupt? And he said, power does not necessarily corrupt, but power always reveals. And I love that.
Ooh, it just makes you more of who you are.
Yes, it makes you more of who you are. I mean, he was sort of saying for better or for worse. I think it's, for most of us, for better. But it does allow us to serve others, to act on behalf of others, right? Not just on behalf of ourselves. Think of a moment in your life, maybe from high school or college. I think there are a lot of these. You see something happening that's wrong. You see another student who's being treated in a way that's wrong. These often happen at these situations at parties where people are drinking a lot. And you don't do anything. You don't do anything, not because you're like, I'm so powerful, I don't care. You don't do anything because you feel powerless, right? You're sitting there feeling like, maybe I'm wrong. You're second guessing yourself. Maybe I'm kind of afraid of this person, and they have more status than I have, so I'm not going to stand up and do the right thing. So I think this idea of, sort of pretending until you become your best self, you really do become your best self, not just to serve yourself, but to serve others as well. So just something I want to put out there that.
Absolutely.
You might be a sledgehammer, but you're a sledgehammer for all of us.
Well, thank you. But what I was saying about the sledgehammer, though, is that what I've learned, what I've taught myself in micro-resilience is to be less of a sledgehammer and to be able to sustain that force over a longer period of time. And so I was such a drive until you drop person, you know, and we push ourselves until we fall over and then we go, see, I was tough, you know. And what I've learned with micro-resilience is to do that differently. Like the tennis players, if you're making small recoveries along the way, instead of just pushing yourself until you fall over, you actually perform at a higher level. You actually do more. So a lot of people feel like wellness ideas are telling you just to slow down and relax, and you're like, I live in New York City. I'm not going to slow down and relax. You know, and so this is about these micro adjustments, but it's not slowing you down. It actually helps you to do more. One of the things I had when I first was teaching myself micro-resilience was I had more energy, focus, and drive. So I would sign up to do 10 times more things, you know, and still drive myself until I drop, right?
That's right.
So I do have to manage that tendency, but I am able to play at a higher level by you know, micromanaging my metabolism a little bit more. Micro-resilience is about the hour-by-hour things that you do. And so it's not looking at what you do on average, but what you do hour by hour.
So what you asked me about my favorite sort of self-nudges. What are your favorite micro-resilience strategies? I mean, and I know there are many, and by the way, this is a book that you will pick up and just want to read straight through. You'll want to stay up all night because you'll be like, this is probably going to change my life tomorrow. I better keep reading.
Well, it does.
It's very evidence-based, and it's also very practical. So
thank you
it's
for
a
that
really
plug.
lovely,
I really
wonderful
appreciate
book.
that.
It's really
But we scoured a lot of different research,
right.
neuroscience,
So what do you like,
physiology.
what do you think is the most?
But I just want to affirm
surprising?
what you just said, is that everything in there is instant gratification. That's what's fun about it, is because it's hour by hour. It's not like, what do you do on average? So one thing that's really changed in what I do from this, and many things have changed, but one good example is exercise. So we all think I should exercise 3 times a week for an hour and I'll stay in good shape. But if I have a big day, when I have to do a big presentation or I have a big report due and I'm going to crash on this report and get it done, we think, you know, I exercised yesterday and I'll exercise tomorrow, but today I'm going to just focus on what I got to get done. And the research shows, when we're looking at, you know, what's the instant gratification out of this, when you do a little bit of exercise, it actually makes you smarter for hours afterwards. So you access your memory better, you make better insights, you generate more ideas. And so having understood that about I can perform better at these other things I have to do if I do a little exercise, and it doesn't have to be an hour of exercise. One study says 20 minutes of dancing will make you smarter, you know. So, you know, dance around a few times while you're getting your proposal done, and you'll be smarter and it'll be better. And so now if I'm going to spend a day writing or doing something, I say, oh my gosh, I have to get a little bit of exercise today because I want to be my best self. I want to get the most out of it. And it looks different than the way you exercise just to stay healthy. So the micro-resilience thing is I'm going to exercise a little bit before I have to perform and get something done versus I'm going to exercise regularly all week.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, because I'm working on a young reader's version of my book, getting there, and is, you know, dealing with middle schoolers, by the way, girls in particular. How do you frame these things in a way that will make them, you know, appealing? Right? Because the way that I think school is set up is, at least, I mean, I live in Newton. You know, how many people are from Newton? I bet like there are 17 people from Newton here. Okay, no. Are there some? Newton, Mass? No. Sorry. Then you're from Westchester or something, right? It's akin to that. Newton is, and the schools are all about, and I think most schools, public schools are about sitting and learning and focusing on the brain, right? And so then kids get, at Newton you get 20 minutes for lunch. 20 minutes.
Wow, that's crazy.
And then there's gym class a few times a week, and then if you're sporty you get to do other stuff, right? But then also you have to do all your homework at night. So the kids think of the mind and body as totally separate, and clearly the signal that they get from school and from their parents, you know, in a way, is that the body is not as important. Even though we tell them to exercise and be healthy, but look at how we, you know, scheduled their days. It's all around the brain. So now I realize when I tell kids that if you know, carry yourself in a way that's more powerful, if you exercise, if you take care of your body, you will think more clearly, you'll do better on those tests, but you also will feel less socially anxious. And there's nothing that 12-year-olds want more than to feel less socially anxious, right? So now I'd say don't teach your kids to sit up straight to show respect to others. Teach them to sit up straight to show respect to themselves. And I think
And it
that's
signals to get respect from others too.
yeah, that's right. But one of the things that you bring up in your book, and it's something that I've just become interested in, because I'm spending the year right now at the School of Public Health at Harvard, and I started working on an issue that kids, especially in less well-funded school districts, face, which is that they are underhydrated. There's lead in the water, or if there ever was, then the kids don't want to use the water fountains. They don't have bottled water, or they pay for it. That if they drink too much water, they have to get up and go to the bathroom, and the teachers don't allow them to get up and go to the bathroom. So there are all these things that
And
are
the bathrooms might be dangerous.
That's
in
exactly
school.
right. That's right. That are built in to lead to kids being underhydrated, and everyone's focusing on the physical health outcomes, but we're focusing on the cognitive outcomes of being underhydrated, and you get into that. Can you say
Again, because
It's
when
so
you think about
simple.
macro versus micro too, is you say, well, I should drink 6 glasses of water a day, and you're probably good at that. But when you're under stress or when you're trying to perform, your habits go out the window. That's probably when you're worst at drinking water. And the brain is a higher percentage of water than the rest of your body. And so
This is part water, right?
it's just the wine is water. I don't know if you can turn water into wine, but you can't ask me to turn wine into water. But you can actually be feeling like your head is fuzzy. You know that feeling like when the ideas won't come and you're trying to put things together? Sometimes if you just drink water, you're going to get better brain performance. And there's actually a lot of studies that we quote on that about kids drinking water before tests and doing better. One of our kids was trying to memorize her lines for a play, and we were like, drink water. And she's like, yes, it's easier. So it's again, the micro thing is about what's going to help you right now, not did you do pretty well on average. So we're looking at how do you perform in the next hour? How do you do better? And drinking water is one of those things study shows it's going to help you in the next hour.
Right, it's not people going, how am I going to make partner drink water now? Right? You can't focus, you can't have that is the goal as you're thinking about these
But if you're like, I got to write this RFP,
Exactly.
which is in the first chapter, you're quoting the first chapter of my book.
Well, I really related.
There was the first story in the book.
Many great stories. The first one,
It's a perfectionist workaholic.
Yeah, perfectionist workaholic woman who's trying to get partner in a law firm.
Yeah.
The water. I mean, think of how simple that is. Water.
Yeah.
Like, why do we resist those things?
Well, it's that we think of macro. We're so well trained to think of macro as what should I do on average? How do I do things on average that help me? And that was what was exciting to us, was to help people look at micro, because it's immediate gratification, and it's easier for us to see why we should do that and not put it off or put it aside. And I think the other thing that we found that's really powerful about micro resilience is it's a lot of little things across a spectrum. So there's brain things, there's metabolism things, there's purpose-oriented things, there's there's a whole segment that deals with the anxiety kinds of things. You talk about the runaway train, and I talk about that a lot too. Is like when you have that anxiety, it's like your emotions are on a runaway train. And in addition to the body presence things, you can also use smells like cinnamon and vanilla to cut through that limbic reaction. And labeling. Have you seen the Matt Lieberman research on labeling? Yeah. And so, again, I love that because it's a complement to the work you're doing.
Can you say a little more about that?
So Matt Lieberman from UCLA did fMRI brain scans and showed that when you're getting that runaway train feeling, one way to slow it down is to just label what you're feeling. To say, I'm frustrated versus I'm angry versus I feel betrayed or I'm helpless. And you don't have to do it out loud. You can just do it in your head. In that meeting that you're having that's going wrong, you can be labeling in your head. And the fMRI brain scans show that it actually reduces that runaway train reaction. And so there's a host of things you can do along those lines. But with micro-resilience, we're showing you a number of small things across the spectrum.
And you find the ones that fit.
Yeah.
I think that there is this reaction, and I think more as a scientist than as someone who is translating science, perhaps. They're saying that it's a panacea. Of course not. No one's saying that. You find the ones that work for you. You find the ways to adapt it to your own self and to what feels comfortable. So I hear from people who say, I don't feel comfortable standing like Wonder Woman. I'm like, don't stand like Wonder Woman.
Yeah, we're getting the signal that we should go to questions.
Oh, I didn't see. Sorry.
It was behind her. It was behind her head. There's no way. Not even you can do that, Wonder Woman.
but that it's okay to take this knowledge, this understanding, these ideas, and
fit it to yourself.
Exactly. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
There's so many stories in your book about how people have done that too,
Yeah.
which is great. Okay, so we're going to questions. How do we do that?
Does anyone have any questions?
Nah. This is a shy bunch.
I have one. You talk about it when you're in the midst of that cycling. I think what a lot of people can't do is just take that moment to stop, to remind themselves to label or drink the water. Do you have some techniques for that?
I think one, and again, we both talk about this, is it's small steps, and that the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So it's unnatural at first, but you'll get better. Another thing that I say is there's proactive and there's reactive. And so you want to be able to use the tools in a reactive moment, but it's hard to get in the habit. So we suggest too that if you do it proactively, so if you do some of these techniques like labeling or using smells or even using body positions, if you schedule that into your day, put it on your calendar 3 times every day, and if you're practicing it proactively, it'll be there for you when you need it reactively.
I have another thought on that, and that's if you really you need to start paying attention to when you start to collapse and breathe in a shallow, quick way. So what is it that's making you do that? I mean, and it may not be extreme, but everyone has a range, right, of moving and standing in expansive ways and breathing in an efficient, slow way versus rushing. What is it that does that for you? And when you get into those moments, how can you slow that down? Because here's the problem. Once you start to really, right, we were talking about when you, I was reading about it was a very sad story about some men who crashed into Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire on snowmobiles, and they drowned in the cold water. And I was reading about what happens to your body when you fall into cold water. And what happens is this incredible nervous system response that's not adaptive, and you start to gasp, and if you can't stop yourself from gasping, you die very quickly. If you can, they say you have about 10 more minutes
So
of
you can
useful
override your instinct.
movement.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that so reminds me of what happens when you see people start to panic when they're giving, say, a pitch on Shark Tank. You see it happen and you're like, oh God, it's the Runaway Train. I cannot watch this. If they pause, if they slow their breathing, even if they close their eyes, take a few deep breaths, and you see people open their shoulders, it stops them from spiraling downward. It is so simple.
But you just said something really powerful too, is overcoming the instinct, and that's what we talk about too, is resetting your primitive alarms, that our wiring, our out-of-the-box wiring that we're born with is not adaptive to the world we're living in. And so a lot of what we're doing, both of us, is retraining you to upgrade your human operating system.
But that takes, I love that way of thinking, and it takes a little bit of work learning how your human operating system works.
Should we get another question?
Got a microphone. Come around.
So first I want to say, after I saw your TED Talk, I'm paraphrasing, I used that during when I was taking the CPA exam, and I'm convinced that's one of the main reasons why I ended up passing them. But the question that I have is for both of you. It's touching upon Bonnie's topic of fear. The whole idea, when you were saying, you feel it, but you still go down the hill on one foot, 75 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm trying to understand better is, what do you do to kind of push yourself over the edge so that fear doesn't become part of the equation? And also, in that regard, do your children feel fear? And what do you teach them to either think about that fear or ignore that fear?
Well, I was saying I'm not fearless, is that I did a lot of things with fear, and I still do, and you do too. And so you do it with fear. But what we're learning and what we're teaching ourselves and through our books is how to not be swallowed up by that fear response. So there's being afraid and just going down the hill. Actually, I did do a lot of techniques when I was skiing on self-hypnosis to pull myself into a better place, too. Why are you laughing at self-hypnosis, too?
It's just like a very clever way of solving that problem, right?
Yeah. And so, but it's the same as you saying it's a conversation, not an interview.
Yeah.
It's the repositioning it in your mind so that you can do it. So I would never say that anyone's going to not feel fear, or that I would tell my kids don't feel fear. They're going to feel fear, and it's good. If the only way to never feel fear is to sit alone in a room on a couch, and not do anything. But so I think it's healthy to do things that make you scared, but getting tools to give your body the best, your body, mind, everything the best shot at dealing with it is what we do.
And I think, fear is in the same family of emotion as anxiety. It's a high arousal, negative emotion. And one of the most clever studies that I've seen on sort of reframing or relabeling was done by a colleague of mine at HBS. Her name is Alison Woodbrooks. And Alison is actually a great performer. She's a singer. And she doesn't feel a lot of stage fright. But she learned to get over that as a kid. And she had an idea about how that worked. And so when she became a psychologist, she realized that anxiety and excitement are both high arousal emotions, but one is negative and one is positive. And so she put people into these really stressful situations like singing competitions and public math exams and debates. And she would have them either say, I am anxious or I am excited. And when they said, I am excited, and they relabeled the high arousal emotion from negative to positive, they totally overcame it and performed incredibly well. They actually harnessed the high arousal part and got rid of the negative part. So basically with emotion, it's very hard to change the arousal level, but it's easier to change the valence from negative to positive or vice versa. So you can take fear, and first you have to go, oh man, I am feeling fear. Wait, maybe it's actually this other thing. So with my son, it's funny, he's a quiet kid, but he plays guitar and gets up and he can play with bands on a stage with 1,000 people in the audience and be totally relaxed because he now thinks of that anxiety as excitement about a thing he loves doing. So he now goes, oh, I'm not anxious, I'm just so excited to do this.
I totally agree. And that's the advice I get. People ask me about speaking, and that's what I say, is they said, do you get fear of speaking or stage fright? And I say, I get excited. And that means you experience all the physical things that go with that.
Yeah.
So that's I love that positioning. Another question?
Hi. So we talk about developing these habits through proactively and these tools that we can apply throughout the course of our day, but they really do take conscious competence still to apply them. Just thinking back on these little things that we can do in order to start to frame the big picture and taking it down to the level of just the day-to-day, and what are the little things we can do to frame the big picture of just that day. And I find that no matter what my momentum in life, there's this moment in the morning right when I wake up where I'm shaking the cobwebs, it's dark in there, and I'm wondering if the day before was all pretend, and how do I get back in the swing of things. And I have my methods and I get there. Just curious, what do each of you do in your morning routines? I find that stuff interesting.
I really have that every single day, and it can really be kind of paralyzing. I mean, if I don't try to correct that, it really can sort of send me down the wrong course for the whole day. So what I've been trying to, this is funny because this is something that I actually really still struggle with.
Have you had this conversation a lot? I think that's the coolest question.
No,
I think
I've never had it.
And
I've had that with my husband, but I've never had it with anyone else.
Yeah, I think
he's not my husband.
I wake up in the morning in a people.
I
Raise your hand.
really-
How many people wake up in a horrible dark place and you gotta flip out of it? Does anybody wake up in a really sunny place? You just wake up and you're like, yay! Okay, see, this is so cool.
Let me just briefly say that we do have, you're all trying to be happy people. One thing we have found is that, and I will come back to what I do, is that people who sleep in the fetal position and wake up in the fetal position are much more anxious in the morning. So, and it's not the lower body. The lower body doesn't, like you can have your lower body curled up, doesn't matter. It's the upper body. People who are like sleeping like Usain Bolt wake up totally relaxed. They get out of bed, they are not anxious, they don't check their email right away, they're annoyingly happy. Right? People who wake up clenched up, I tell them to I say, look, it's hard to change the way you sleep. The sleeping position does not vary much within person across time, but what you can change is what you do before you get out of bed. So spend 1 minute stretching out, like really expanding in bed, making yourself into a starfish before you put your feet on the ground. So that is one thing that I've done. Here's the other thing for me that I have to do. I have a thing that I look forward to every morning. My husband is Australian and he loves coffee. I don't know if anyone's Australian here, but Australians love their coffee, and he hand grinds and measures the temperature and all this crap. And it's the best, but I hear him hand grinding it. I look forward to that. I know every morning I have that to look forward to. But I always find one thing in the day that I'm actually excited about. Even if it's a day that's mostly filled with stuff I'm not excited about, there's got to be one thing I'm excited about. And so that's what I kind of try to focus on. But I relate to that, and I think it's not uncommon.
The thing I do is I like to sleep with the curtain open. So when I wake up, I see light and I see sky. And if it's a dark sky and it's all cloudy, I say to myself, but it's sunny on the other side of the clouds. And that's one of the things I do to turn myself around, because I wake up in a dark place. I wake up in a yucky, the world is horrible place. And I have to get to a better place. But I've never even told my husband. That's why I like sleeping with the curtains open, because he hates sleeping with the curtains open. And that's why, honey.
Sorry, I think she was calling her husband honey, not you. Because he's sitting right back there.
Yeah, he's behind the guy who asked the question.
Can I say one more thing? I want to say one more thing about another book that I'm really excited about. It's not mine also. And that's a book by Adam Alter, who I think is not here tonight. Adam is another one of Richard Pine's writers. He also was sort of like my little brother in graduate school. His second book just came out this last week called Irresistible, and it's about our addiction to technology. And it's really wonderful. I think it's the best book on that topic. And, you know, we all see ourselves in it. He does too, and he's very honest about that. But I really cannot, especially in the last, for me, the last 6 months, I'm not saying that's true for everyone, I can't go on Twitter, I can't go to the news right away. Like, I just can't start the day like that. I've got to have the cup of coffee first, talk about some other things. For me, it's music and skiing that I'm excited about. And until I'm like kind of a little bit stronger to dive in and see what has happened to, in the last 12 hours on Twitter politically.
Do we have time for another question? How are we doing?
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
Just a quick question. When's your book for young readers coming out? Because I want to buy that for every young woman that I know.
I think in about a year and a half. Yeah, it's going to be a little while, but I'm glad to hear that.
Hi, this is a quick question for Professor Cuddy. Well, a comment and a question. I actually saw you speak once before, and I was really intrigued when you talked about people who clench their hands when they sleep or don't clench their hands, and I noticed that the evening that I clench my hands, and I can actually feel a difference when I unclench. So if you're a hand clencher, I recommend trying to unclench. But I'm just curious in general about your work, which I've listened to your talks and I've read a fair amount, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I've heard your work categorized as part of this research into what they call embodied cognition, and this obviously this idea between kind of the mind and the body. And I was hoping maybe you could just talk a little bit about the science behind that. Like, why is there such an important connection between how the body reacts, how the mind reacts to the body?
So we don't know for sure. So let me just say, there are a lot of different theories. And part of what's interesting about this area of work, it's funny, I didn't think of ours as embodied cognition, and it was an editor who told us that we had to call it embodied cognition, which was kind of interesting because we were coming from a kind of different background. The idea, right, is that your body is shaping your thoughts. It's not just your thoughts shaping your body, but it's bidirectional. There are evolutionary reasons, possibly, right? So when it comes to certain emotions, in particular, certain emotions are linked to certain physical expressions, usually facial expressions, but some postural expressions. And they're so hardwired, like the victory pose and feelings of power and pride, that not only do they reflect how we feel, but they're just so hardwired that when we do them, our mind thinks we must already feel that way. We must have already won. So that's part of it. But then, I mean, in the case of, you know, with the work that we're doing on posture and power, there are so many different mechanisms. I mean, there's the evolutionary mechanism that it's just so hardwired, and I know that's not even a very satisfying answer. You know, we've looked at hormones which replicate sometimes and not other times. Like, clearly that's a moderated effect. And it's dependent on, I'm sure, whether people feel comfortable doing it. Are they in front of other people? Are they not in front of other people? Even how are the hormones measured, which we don't have sorted out perfectly. Like, in the last 6 months, one of the major hormones researchers, his name is Pranj Mehta, discovered that the 3 labs that almost all people doing social neuroendocrinology use are getting totally different results.
So it depends how much lab you use.
That's alarming, right? And that technique that they're using may not be the best technique. So I think we're going to learn a lot more about hormones in the next 10 years. But another thing that I think is happening, especially in the case of sort of power and cognition, is actually through the vagus nerve and through the relaxation response. So when we expand, so doctors know about this relaxation response. You breathe more deeply, it triggers this response that calms you down, that basically activates your rest and digest response as opposed to your fight or flight response. That's through the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. We hadn't really been thinking when we started studying, you know, open posture, that that's part of what's happening. That people are, when they're in an expansive posture, they're breathing more deeply, they're breathing in a way that triggers that same response. Now, what a neuroscientist named Peter Strick, who's at Pitt, really amazing guy, recently discovered, he's a guy who said he didn't believe in yoga or Pilates. I never know quite what that means. Like, even if you don't do like,
you don't believe it happens?
Exactly, no, but he didn't believe in the benefits of it. And he's a tennis player. It's all coming together. But he gets very stressed when he makes a mistake during his tennis matches. And so his daughter said, "You gotta take yoga or Pilates or something." You know, and he was like, "That's nonsense, I don't believe in it." And so he started taking Pilates because he said that felt more sciencey to him, and it really, really decreased his stress response. And so he started studying it. And one of the things that he's onto is that core muscle engagement, which you use more when you're in expansive postures, in Pilates or yoga, activates a complex system of, you know, cortical pathways that ultimately control the adrenal medulla, which controls the release of epinephrine, which is the stress hormone that you feel first, right? So it's down-regulating epinephrine release. So that's another thing that might be going on. So I wish I had an easier answer, but first, I don't think it all fits. This embodied cognition as a category, I'm not sure if it's a real category. Or second, I think, you know, if you break these things down, we're going to get closer to the answers for each of them.
I just thought that was a great, yet another story of people study and write books about what they most need to learn.
Exactly,
right,
yeah.
We all do.
Yeah, we were talking about like whether people write books about things that come easy to them or that are really challenging for them. And I have read sort of nonfiction self-helpy books by people who are like this is easy for me, but all you losers, I might be able to teach you a thing or two. I mean, they don't say that, but I get that vibe. I'm like, I'm not reading this book.
Yeah, you didn't struggle. You didn't
Exactly.
struggle with this. Yeah, you don't get it. Yeah. Okay. Should we get another question?
Question?
There's one over here.
Run, Michael,
It's
run.
so hard to get through. So many people here.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Bonnie, I was really interested when you talked about that moment when you were 37, you had that turning point, and you realized that you had been sort of going full throttle for most of your life, and you could pull back a little. Did you find that going full throttle actually was counterproductive sometimes, and what did you do? Like, what changed for you after that moment?
I wouldn't describe it that way. You said I was going full throttle and I realized I didn't have to go full throttle. That's not what I was really saying. Is I was saying that I just did things with fear and realized I could go full throttle without having as much fear, and I didn't have to be so fear-based, and that I could consciously let go of that. So I did say like stepping back from fear, which sounds like pulling the throttle back, but it's not actually quite the same thing. And part of the reason why that was probably happening at 37 was because my daughter was hitting the ages that I was when I was sexually abused. And so I had a lot of stuff, like the sewage system back up. And I had to deal with it, which I laugh about now, but it was really not pretty. So that's probably why I had to do some healing work and come to grips with some things. And so some things really shifted in my emotional well-being to do that. People say, what is the hardest thing you've ever done? And I would say healing from sexual abuse was probably, it's like Olympic medals, sure. Healing from sexual abuse, harder. And so I like to say, everybody, I'd be surprised if there's anybody here not dealing with something like that, with healing in some way from some trauma or something in your family or something. And you deserve an Olympic medal for that. So making, I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I just was curious what changed for you after that turning point in the way you approached.
Just being able to be in the world differently. I mean, it's not just throttling back from fear, but dealing with the trauma. And you talked a little bit about this too, is that you had trauma that you had to deal with. And so I got PTSD. I mean, you probably had a certain amount of that too. And so coming to grips with that and healing from that, I just was able to feel my own emotions more. I was able to know what I wanted more. I was able to prior to that, I had been so much about wearing a shell and achieving things, but I was able to have more of my life back.
Can I ask you one more question?
I don't know, Michael, can you?
That I think might be a nice one. Can you share, one of the stories that you've heard from people who've been moved by your work that you find the most inspiring?
Wow.
and that makes you the most hopeful?
It's funny, I'm most well known for telling the story about falling down and getting up at the Olympics. And so I was in the slalom race, and I finished the first run, and I was in first place. And I was an upset. I was the third ranked woman in the US. Nobody expected me to beat my teammates, never mind everybody else in the world. So I was in first place going into the second run of the slalom, and it's a new course. You don't ski the same course twice. And the women in front of me were crashing, and they said there's a really dangerous icy spot on the course. And so I thought I don't even have to, go all out. If I just stay standing, I could win the gold. And I went down and I fell. And I got up and I got over the finish line. And I thought I failed, but I still won the bronze medal because everybody on one leg fell down and got up. And so people fall down, winners get up, but sometimes the gold medal winner is just the person who gets up the fastest. The woman who won that race didn't beat me in the first run. I was the best skier when nothing went wrong. She got up faster than I did. She was the quicker getter-upper. And so I've told that story in a lot of places, and hearing people come back to me and say, I can get back in the game. I failed, but I can get back in the game. I can get back into my marriage. I can take the LSAT again, or I can, and that's why I write about resilience, is so the most inspiring stories for me are people who say, I can go back and try again. And you know, in today's world, that's what it is it's not if we're gonna fall down or if things are gonna go wrong, it's how good can we get at bouncing back. Thank you for asking
We
that.
do have one last question from Facebook. We've been streaming this on Facebook, by the way, and you can watch the video later if you would like. And we do have one person who asks, she says you both have lovely smiles. And can you say anything about the importance of smiles? This person is worried that, especially nowadays, everyone's looking down at their phones and there's less smiling going on in the world.
That plays right into the effect that your physicality has.
I mean, you know, all right, so smiling is the most studied of the emotional expressions, right? So it's the first one that people, that Paul Ekman, I think, you know, decided was universally linked to happiness or good mood across cultures everywhere you go. And then there was a whole, you know, decades of research on what's called the visual feedback hypothesis, and that's that when you smile, it's not just an expression of happiness, it's a cause of happiness. And by the way, for anyone following these replication crises in social psychology, let me tell you that effect, despite whatever clickbait headline you might see about it not replicating, that effect, facial feedback, which was documented by Fritz Strack, has been shown nearly 1,000 times all over the world. So it is a real effect. When you smile, it makes you feel better. So I do think, you know, keeping that in mind is important, but also keep in mind that smiling is contagious in a way kind of that yawning is. You know, it's very hard to watch someone with a genuine smile and not be smiling. Even there's a great clip that I like to use. It's of Obama singing. He's at a.
Is it Amazing Grace? I think
No. I'm so in love with you.
Stay together.
Okay.
Al Green.
Al Green, thank you. He's singing Al Green, and Al Green is like there, and he's. I mean, Barack Obama smiles after singing this, the first two lines of the song. It is a massive, contagious smile. I love playing that in classrooms where I know that like half of the people don't want to smile watching him, and they can't help it. They can't help it. It's this beaming smile. So I do worry about, you know, I do think it's so much more important to have, when we're having phone calls, to be looking at each other, you know, and to be looking at each other, not, you know, just having the camera on. I worry about what's lost from us looking down at our phones all the time, but which also, by the way, affects our posture in a way that makes us feel powerless, and we have research on that as well. Yeah, smiling matters, you know. I want us to take a little bit more time to look up from our phones and smile at each other.
I remember being in the hospital for many months when I was 5, 6 years old, and when people would come into the hospital, the Shriners would come in and entertain us. I was in a Shriners hospital, and Elizabeth Montgomery, Bewitched, came in and talked to all of us, and I don't know, I mean, I guess it's just who I am, but I remember that they would come in and smile and make us feel better, and I wanted to do that for other people.
Thank you so much, Bonnie and Amy. That was amazing. And thank you, everybody who asked all those amazing questions.